The future doesn't belong to the busiest leader. It belongs to the one who can see it first. Welcome to The Vision Architect, a podcast how bold visions are created, communicated, and turned into reality. I'm your host, Simon Vetter. Hello and welcome to another show of The Vision Architect. I am very fortunate to have a good friend on the show today, Scott Eblin. I've known him over 20 years, and he is the author of two amazing books. One is called The Next Level, What Insiders Know About Executive Success. And the other one is called Overwhelmed and Overworked, The Mindfulness Alternative. Two amazing books. Scott is a teacher, executive coach, and also a very kind, insightful, wonderful human being. So, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I hope I live up to all that. I appreciate that, Simon.
You do. I remember we met the first time. Was it in San Diego on the beach about 23 years ago?
Yeah, I would think so. Was that around like 2004? You're thinking of the big Marshall Goldsmith meeting at the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club? Is that the one?
Yes, exactly. And I have seen you evolve and writing books and speaking. And so I want to talk about a few topics. One around leadership presence. How do we stay present as an executive? Yeah. The other one around to aspire to that next level. It's a promotion or advancement or more responsibility. What do we need to have to let go and what do we need to add? Yeah. And then the third one around life GPS. How do we create a direction, a vision that is clear and then we stay focused and progressing? And then we'll go into many other topics. Sure. And so one of the things currently, I don't know anybody who's not busy.
Right.
Everybody has more on their list to do what they should do than they have time available. And so how do we stay connected, calm, centered? So oftentimes this concept of executive presence and leadership presence comes up. And I love your phrase to have leadership presence, we need to be present.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit that concept and why is it important and what makes it so hard to have strong leadership presence?
Well, the last part of that question is like a how long do you have kind of answer, in terms of what makes it hard, because, you alluded to it, Simon, there's so much going on in the world. Everybody is oversaturated. So many people are, at least. Oversaturated, overbooked. You mentioned this, one of my books, Overworked and Overwhelmed. There's a reason that I titled it that. And, that book was in 2014 was when I wrote that book. And here we talk in 2026. And I think if anything, it's 3X, what it was in 2014, right? Because there's this the rapidity of change just continues to accelerate. I'm sure we'll talk about AI, in this conversation. And, that's the most obvious example of how quickly the world is changing, but there's, so many others. And so, the subtitle of that Overworked and Overwhelmed book is probably where I would start, actually, on executive presence. And I'm sure we'll talk about the next level framework as well. But the subtitle of the Overworked and Overwhelmed book you mentioned is The Mindfulness Alternative. And so I really like simple definitions. And the definition that I kind of came up with for that book, Overworked and Overwhelmed, was mindfulness equals two things. It equals awareness plus intention. And I always think about awareness kind of operating in two domains. There's awareness extrinsically, what's going on around me in my environment. That quite often honestly triggers me intrinsically. There's an awareness of my emotional reaction or response, what I'm thinking about, just how does all this stuff in the external world, in fact, affect my internal world? So that's the first thing, is awareness, kind of in multiple domains. And then the next piece of my little definition is intention. So mindfulness equals awareness plus intention. And if I have that level of awareness, both externally and internally, ideally, I'm in a position to be intentional about what I'm going to do next, and quite often what I'm not going to do next. And the not do next maybe is just as maybe more important than the do next, because there's just so many things that we can choose to do. And, to be present is a choice. And I can continue to pay attention to all the incoming on my device and all the notifications and just all the things that are competing for my attention, where I can be intentional about putting that aside and being with you, or being with my team, or being with my spouse or my kids or myself. That's a good one too. So I guess I would start with mindfulness, as my answer to your question.
Yeah. Attention. We all get so much input. And the question is, where do we put our attention? Yeah. And oftentimes we get distracted, we get interrupted. And so how do we stay aware and be mindful about where we put our intention? Yeah. What tools or how do you deal with that? And then how do you help your clients with this?
One of the things that I share quite often with my clients is a little framework I came up with actually when I was writing the Overworked book. And I've used it a lot since then in conversations with leaders, either one-on-one or in groups. I did that earlier this week, actually, in a group setting. And I frame it as there are basically three ways that you can engage with other people or listen to other people and be with them. The first of those three is transient engagement, and none of us need to practice that, because transient engagement, my mind is somewhere else, and it's all the things that are competing for the attention again. And I'm really just all about, to the degree that I do engage with you, it's really just let me get this over with, and so I can get on to what's more important, because I think it's more important, even though it's not. Being with you is really the more important thing. So that's one. We don't need to practice that because it comes naturally, unfortunately. Then the next kind of engagement you see a lot, I think, in corporate world is transactional engagement. And so that's the kind of engagement with people where it's in service of getting something done, solving a problem, identifying a next step. Super important. I mean, that's how we make progress in the world quite often. And I would say if you stop there, then you leave a lot of opportunity and value on the table, because you're really not engaging in the third type as much, which is more transformational engagement, which is being with the other person, with the people, with no other purpose than just to connect and to learn and to be with each other. And I don't say that you should live there, because, I think you got to toggle back and forth really between transformational and transactional engagement, especially as a leader. But especially as a leader, I think the transformational engagement has so much leverage, because your ripple effect as a leader is so big. And, you have impact sometimes that you don't even realize you're having, just because people look up at least to your position, if not to you. They kind of put that on a pedestal at some level, or if they don't do that, then they understand that you have a lot of impact on their life, as the designated leader, especially depending, on different structures and so forth. So I would encourage folks to think about, where are you on that spectrum, transient, transactional, and transformational? And, if you feel like you're maybe more transient than you want to be, or, I wouldn't think you want to be much of that at all, really. But, pay attention to that. And if you feel like you're kind of maybe over-indexing on the transactional engagement, then look for the opportunities to take your foot off that gas pedal and kind of lean into the more connective kind of transformational opportunities to engage.
The other thing around the attention span is sometimes we need to renew energy to be attentive.
Yeah.
And if the mind, it's like we all have a monkey brain. Everything goes through the mind, and so how do we center ourselves and stay present, and to be engaged and fully there with other people? How do you practice that in your life?
Yeah, I mean, to slow down and renew. Yeah, I it's funny you mentioned you're kind enough to mention the Next Level book when we started, and that book is really about the behaviors and mindsets you either need to pick up or that you need to let go of as you're moving into bigger and bigger roles, or more and more challenging opportunities in your career, and really maybe even in your life. And I've got 9 pairs of high level behavior sets, mindset sets. That's hard to say without without getting tongue twisted. Pickups and let goes, and the second of those 9 pairs is pick up regular renewal of your energy and perspective, and let go of running flat out until you crash. Because again, it's just easy to get into a do loop where you're just pushing yourself until you become ineffective in the short run and ill in the long run, because you've gotten yourself in a chronic state of fight or flight. And so for me personally, my practice with that and my routines really have evolved over the years. A big pivot point for me on that was in 2009, was when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I'd been a driver, up until that point in my career, my life, really. I was going to say career, life. I'll just be honest about it. Since I was a little kid, I was always pushing for the next thing. I'm not to say that I completely let go of that in 2009, but the MS really got my attention that year. And I identified myself back then as a runner. There was a book when I was growing up called The Complete Book of Running by Jim Fixx, and it was kind of the Bible of running in the 70s, I guess, is when it came out. Tells you how old I am. I was a teenager in the 70s, and I read that book, probably when I was in junior high or high school, and started to run a lot. And I ran a couple of marathons and a lot of different, road races and stuff. I was never competitive. I just liked it, and one of the things I learned from the Jim Fixx book is if you're running, it's going to hurt at some point. And when it hurts, you don't stop, you keep going. Because,
you push through the pain.
You're in the middle of a 10-mile run or 15-mile run or a marathon or whatever it is. And your brain may say like, I want to stop, or your body definitely says, I want to stop. He wrote, you have to remind yourself that there was a reason you started that 10-mile run. And even if you can't remember it right now, you better damn well finish it. And that was my mindset on everything. Like, I am pushing through. And that early in 2009, when I got out for a run, I was like running 7 or 8 mile runs on the weekends in my, mid 40s. And my legs started to feel like lead, like there was just no spring in them. And I won't bore you with the whole story, but long story short, I went to a physician. She ordered MRIs, and I had MS. I had multiple sclerosis and, lesions in my brain and in my spine. And it was what MS does is it slows the electrical signals from your brain to other parts of your body down. It doesn't transmit as well as it should. And so weird stuff starts to happen. And I got really bad in a bad way that year, into 2010. And then finally, a friend of my wife's, who's a multi-degreed health expert and also teaches yoga, and she said to Diane that Scott should do yoga. Right? So I have really good outcomes with MS patients and Parkinson's patients with yoga. You should do that. It's like I could barely walk around the block. How am I going to do that? But eventually, she kept pushing me. I eventually went to a yoga class one night, and the teacher, when I whispered to her that I had MS, because we weren't telling anybody back then, she said, "That's okay. We have people like you here all the time. And here's the deal: if you come here more than 3 days a week, it'll change your body. If you come here more than 3 days, come here 3 days a week, it'll change your body. If you come here more than 3 days a week, it'll change your life." And so I started going more than 3 days a week. And what it does is it activates your parasympathetic response, your rest and digest response. It gets you out of fight or flight, and all the systems in your body that either elevate or de-elevate when you're in fight or flight start going in the other direction when you're in rest and digest. They go in the direction that's healthier, and it helps you manage your stress, which you totally have to do when you have a chronic illness. And that was the beginning of it. And so since then, I've just layered on with the yoga and other forms of movement, regular, methodical movement, layer in meditation pretty much every morning for somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes. I read every morning. I try to read things that provoke thought in different ways. I started reading novels in the morning. I just finished a novel called Orbital, which is about 4 astronauts in the space station orbiting the Earth. Over the course of a day, there's 16 orbits around the Earth. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. Very contemplative, meditative kind of book as they look at the Earth and all the things that are happening on Earth, and they think about their own lives. And I find that kind of reading, plus this morning I was reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is a classic. I was reading a book on writing. So I'm really kind of varied. And then I read first, then I meditate, and then I journal. And so I'll journal, so all that takes, depending on how much time I have in the morning, somewhere between 45 minutes.
What did this incident when you got diagnosed 2008, what did that teach you about life?
One, to quit pushing so hard. I mean, that, and the other is stress management is really key. And the other one, this is probably the biggest one, really. Everything in life is temporary. There are, other than death, I think there are really no permanent conditions. And the reason I learned that from MS is there would be mornings in those first couple of years when I was really trying to figure out how to grapple with it. I want to acknowledge too, if most people who meet me, if they've learned that I have MS, are really surprised by that, because I don't really show a lot of the symptoms, that a lot of folks with MS would show. So I am very fortunate. MS presents lots of different ways, and I want to acknowledge that. But I think there are things you can do in your self-management to, mitigate the impact of it. And I've been very fortunate in that way. But what I mean by everything is temporary is there would be mornings when I would wake up or, just in the middle of the day, suddenly I would start to feel like crap. I just felt like sometimes I would describe it as being like the toothpaste being squeezed out of the tube. I just felt everything was compressed and it was just getting squeezed and tight, and, or I'd have brain fog or this or that. I mean, and then you can easily get into a mindset of this is going to be for the rest of my life. And I would definitely have that. I would have that for weeks at a time initially. And it was like, and the more you think that way, the worse it gets. And then I noticed that if I started focusing on something else, I would start feeling better. And I'm not saying there's a line in the book, the Overworked and Overwhelmed book, about we're all psychosomatic. Like that sometimes we say to somebody, oh, you're just psychosomatic. Well, I would argue that we're all psychosomatic because what we think determines so much about how we feel, the psychology of it and the somatic of it, the body of it, is really a thing, And so the meta lesson was every condition is temporary. It can change in a moment's notice. And if you don't like the current situation, check your thought process and start thinking about something else, start thinking about how you can change it, whatever it is, right? So,
and I think that's also our biggest power.
Totally.
Because we can change the thought process every time if we're really going back, if we are intentional and pay our attention to where we want to put our thoughts. Yeah. And going back to your approach to being pushing. I mean, we work both with a lot of leaders in their 30s, 40s, and they're pushing hard. And oftentimes that is one of the reasons why they're successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how do you advise someone who has that innate ability to push hard? And it's like, I think we can learn a lot from athletes. They push very hard. And if they push too hard, they get injured.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a classic book by Jim Lohr and Tony Schwartz, the Powerful Engagement. They wrote a classic HBR article years ago
Yep.
called "The Making of the Corporate Athlete." Jim Lohr, I read, just passed away a few weeks ago in his 80s. But
I love his
yeah,
books, and I use it a lot in my
he did a
coaching.
lot of good.
It's a great
And so
approach.
Jim Lohr, if I remember correctly, started out as a sports psychologist, and he worked with a lot of
Tennis coach too, and
yeah,
he was looking at tennis
right.
games, and
He worked with a lot of elite athletes, and he made the point that it's exertion plus recovery, and that all athletes have routines of recovery in both their training and in their competition. Like you mentioned to tennis, Carlos Alcaraz, I guess, is the latest and greatest guy from Spain. It seems like they're all from Spain, him and Rafael Nadal and all those guys. But anyway, you watch those guys between points, between sets, they'll have little micro routines of recovery, between the points, between the games, between the sets, and depending on how much time they have. And I think we can do the same thing, as non-professional athletes or non-Olympians or whatever it might be. One that I teach my leaders all the time, either through executive education or coaching, is breathing. I always joke when I lived in Los Angeles, we lived out there for about 8.5 years, and my joke is if you live in LA for more than a year, there's a municipal ordinance that you're required to take yoga teacher training. And because that's what they do in LA, especially West LA. And so I did yoga teacher training for about 14 weeks in 2013. And in the second weekend, I realized, oh my gosh, there's so much in this program that I could apply to my work as a coach, and so I asked the teacher, Brigitte Kristen, who was a 30-year yoga teacher at that point. She was amazing. I said, could I take you to lunch? Here's what I do. I want to get the download from you. What do you think I should focus on? So we went to lunch and said, so Brigitte, what should I be working on with my clients? And she immediately said, breathing. Ambitious people don't know how to breathe. I said, like, oh, everybody knows how to breathe. They said, yeah, they do, but they don't breathe the right way. And her point was they breathe kind of up here in their chest, really shallow. Sometimes people even stop breathing, momentarily. Not a great long-term strategy, but they do that momentarily. And if you're breathing, what Brigitte would say is the right way, on the inhale, your belly should expand as the chest cavity fills up, the diaphragm pushes down, the belly expands. And then on the exhale, the belly should contract, right? And, you can do that even as you're listening to us right now, listener. You could do that with your hand on your belly and just notice it going in and out if you are breathing deeply enough. And so 3 cycles of that even. I did it this week in an executive ed program I was leading for 60 or 70 people. 3 cycles of deep breathing. How do you feel? Calm, centered, clear, and it's that relax, because you're activating the parasympathetic response. And if you're in fight or flight and your brain is spun up and the stress hormones are spiked and all that, and you're not thinking clearly or you're irritable or whatever it might be, pay attention to that. That's some internal awareness, and that should be your cue to take your foot off the gas, put it on the braking system, the rest and digest response, and breathe, right? That's a big thing that people can do to recover, throughout the day.
I often do, especially with very busy leaders. I start with a 1-minute shared silence.
Yeah. What's the impact of that? What do you see from that?
It's really get them to, as you said, to calm down their whole system and do a little bit. And then going back to Jim Lohr's book, The Powerful Engagement, it's a strategic disengagement, which is taking a pause. Mm-hmm. And allowing your system to calm down.
Yeah.
And it also clears the brain activities. And I think I had this one guy, it was a 4:00 coaching call, and we got into discussions, and I felt like he was not with me. His thoughts jumping around all over. And I said, hey, let's do an exercise. So I invited him to do a 1-minute breathing exercise. And then after a minute, I said, what was your experience? And he said, well, I had a 2-hour meeting about budgeting and it got very heated. I stopped the meeting and came straight into the coaching session.
Yeah.
So he took the energy from that 2-hour intense meeting right into it. So his brain was still in that state. And to your point, he learned to, within a minute, rest and restore, activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And his thinking, his clarity of judgment became much more productive. And again, I think that that concept of strategically disengage, take a break between meetings, take a walk, 5 minutes around the block, step up, eat something, change your focus for a few minutes.
Totally. I mean, I know, you're the vision guy, right? As it says in, your website and everywhere else. I think there's opportunities to get clear throughout the day about your vision. Most of the people we work with, probably, Simon, are somewhere between 5 and 8, maybe even 10 meetings a day, where they're just going from one thing to the next really quickly with very little time between to reset. But the really interesting thing, with the breathing, a minute in your example, 3 rounds of breathing in my example, probably close to a minute. And once we do that together, or once they, adopt that routine for themselves, my next suggestion is, okay, once you get clear, ask yourself 2 questions about the next conversation or the next meeting you're about to go into. Question number 1 is, what am I trying to do here? What outcome am I trying to create? What do people know, think, do, feel, believe at the end of this? Second big question is, how do I need to be? How do I need to show up to make that outcome more likely? And visualize the energy that you're bringing into that conversation. Not just what you're going to say, but how people are going to experience you, in that conversation, and what's your vision of how that's going to affect or impact the way people respond, hopefully, rather than react, so that you get to the outcome you're trying to create together, right? And most folks everybody's busy. Almost everybody's got a minute, between an event or a meeting. And I think that's one thing that's really cool that we get to do as coaches, is suggest that kind of routine to folks, and makes an enormous impact, when they do that.
Yeah, I love this whole simple application. You can do this for every meeting. What are we trying to accomplish? You can even set the agenda and the intention. What do we want to walk away with? Is it a decision?
Yeah, totally.
Is it delegation? Is it discussion of what? And to make that happen, how do we show up as a team, and how do I show up? If it's my meeting, I can drive it, but then also bring people together. And we can apply this visioning to small increments throughout the day.
Yeah, completely. Because our day is really just made up of a series of interactions, and our week is made up of a series of days, and and weeks, months out of weeks. I mean, so the building blocks of our year are each of those little interactions that we have, right? I guess you certainly can ask yourself, this is kind of get to the life GPS part of the conversation maybe, but you can ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish this year in different arenas of life? And then, you can start reversing engineering back from that to say, okay, well, how would I need to be, on a consistent basis to help create the environment or the conditions, for those sorts of outcomes to occur, right?
Let's go talk about the GPS. And a GPS requires a good map.
Yeah.
You need to know where you are. You need to understand the landscape. If you want to travel from San Diego to New York, it's a clear destination. And so it's like, if I use a GPS, it's like, how do I get there? Mm-hmm. And so applying that to life is, we have an abundance of opportunities and choices. How do we help people understand the map and use the GPS to help them create a path that is fulfilling, rewarding,
Yeah.
enjoyable,
Yeah. Yeah.
satisfying, and rich in learning. Give me a little bit of a sense of this system that you came up with, and then we can dive into some of the elements of the
Okay,
GPS.
cool. So my wife Diane and I mentioned earlier, she and I developed the Life GPS framework for ourselves, like probably 35 years ago now. That's how old I am. That's how long we've been married. When our kids were little, and this was the period when the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People had sort of just come out or been out a few years. And I loved that book, still love that book. I've probably read it 6 or 7 times over the years. And I think a lot of it, especially when I first read it, I was like, okay, this is great, but how do you implement this stuff? Like, how do you make it actionable? Because there's just so much in there, I couldn't really figure it out. So we came up with the Life GPS as a one pager kind of self planning tool. We called it Stephen Covey for Dummies. It's just, and it's really turns on 3 questions. First question is, how are you when you're at your best? How do you know yourself to be when you're in your sweet spot or in the zone or in a state of flow? And that could be, you can reflect on those moments, those situations at work. You can reflect on those situations with your family at home. You can reflect on it maybe in your church group or your civic group that you're involved in or the sports group that you're involved in, whatever it is. Wherever you feel that way the most, those are good reference points. And so reflect on that. How are you at your best? Come up with a short list of words that are on the GPS system. They use really precise latitudes and longitudes to guide you along the way. All right, those satellites are calibrating against that with your device. And I think of the words that describe you at your best as like latitude and longitude. So like in my own case, the words that I've used for the last number of years are calm, clear. When I'm at my best, I'm calm, clear, connected, creative, loving, and fun. And I can ask myself throughout the day, am I showing up that way? Or at the beginning of the day, I can think about what's coming up today where I really need to lean into one or more of these characteristics. Like, what does connection look like for me today? What does loving look like for me today when I know I'm going to have a challenging conversation with somebody or I'm anticipating that? What does fun look like? That's the one I want to pay maybe the most attention to, because it's not it's not my natural state, but I've recognized over the years when I'm at my best, I'm having fun and I'm helping others have fun. And so that's the first big question. The second big question is, what are the routines in 4 domains: physical, mental, relational, and spiritual, that if I was practicing them on a regular basis would enable me to be more at my best more often, right? And there's a lot of really good research that would tell you what the core routines probably need to be in each of those 4 domains, especially physical and probably mental as well. Also relational. And I think about killer apps in each of those domains. I mean, physical, you move, eat, and sleep for sure are all important. If you're only going to do one, I think the most accessible one for most people to get started with is some form of movement. And that's got a lot of lift and leverage to it. Mental routines, breathing and slowing down for routines that help you, just like we were talking about earlier, just help you clear. Relational routines, I think transformational listening is kind of the foundation of a lot of good relational routines. And then spiritual, non-denominational, traditional way to think about it is reflection. Some kind of routine of reflection that helps you connect with your sense of purpose about why you're even here on this earth, and what your purpose is here in this life. So anyway, those are the routines. And then if I was showing up at my best and the routines are helping me do that, the third big question is, what outcomes would I hope or expect to see in the 3 big arenas of life: my life at home, my life at work, and my community life, and whatever communities I'm involved in. And it's not like a dead solid goal that if I don't hit it, I failed. It's just notionally, what would I hope or expect? What intentions do I have? Back to intentionality. What intentions do I have in these arenas? And checking in on that, am I tracking towards those over the course of a week or a month or a year? And if I'm not, maybe my vision wasn't completely true to itself, wasn't completely authentic. or maybe I feel like that is really what I'm hoping to see and create, but there's some things where I'm falling off the mark, in terms of how I'm showing up, how I'm engaging. And so it's just kind of all integrated on a page, and I pull mine out once or twice a week and just look at it. How am I doing? Where do I need to double down? What's working well? Things like that.
Let's recap this. I think this is so powerful and so important. So the three areas is first, understand when we're in a flow, when we're at our best, and define a few keywords.
Yeah, they're reference points.
That really helps us refer to, and then say, okay, how do I show up on a daily basis? The second one then is understand to have clear routines and practices in the 4 areas of energy management: physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual. And how do we establish those practices that helps us to stay fully present, fully engaged? And then the third one is being very intentional. What is the desired outcome? And I love Stephen Covey's habit, start with the end in mind.
Totally. Right.
Be really intentional. What are we trying to accomplish? What's the outcome? What's the result we want to aspire? And do that home life, relations at home, at work, professionally, and then also in our community, friends and family.
Right.
Now, once you set this up, how often you check in? How do you adjust? Give me a little bit of sense of implementation of this GPS system throughout the day, throughout the year.
Well, so you can create one, on your own. I would say in an hour. I've got a digital course that I produced this past year called Best Life Ever that people could look at on my website, that I'm walking you through, in a series of videos, how to create your own life GPS. But you don't need me to do that. I mean, I'm available by video if you want me to do that, but you can do it on your own. I would say if you want a worksheet, people can go to my website, eblingroup.com, and download one for free, a life GPS worksheet. But it's just being reflective on that. So that's the basic version. For me personally, what Diane and I have done for the past 30 years or so is every fall, usually around October or November, we take a few days away together, usually over a weekend. And sometimes it's really simple, and sometimes it's a little bit more over the top in terms of where we go and what we do. But we spend a good portion of that weekend, 3 or 4 hours a day over the course of a 3 or 4 day weekend, or 2 or 3 day weekend, talking about our life GPS. And we work on we each work on it individually, usually for the first half of the weekend. And then the second half of the weekend, we share with each other, what we're thinking about and coming up with. And, we know each other really well. We've been married to 38 years, I think. Going on 39. It'll be 39 in June. Thank you. So we know each other really well, and does this feel right? Am I kidding myself? What do you think? And so that's been enormously helpful to us over the years. And I think it's been a huge factor in being married for 39 years, for 25 of those 39.
To keep it together.
For 25 of those 39 years, we built a business together. And, people always ask me, like, how do you guys do that? Like, be married and not kill each other when you're in the business. And that's a whole other conversation. But, I think just having that kind of grounding in the GPS process has been huge for us. And then, like I said earlier, on an ongoing basis, I encourage my clients to do this too. I use this a lot with my clients. Look at it regularly. I look at it weekly. You could look at it monthly. I kind of feel like weekly is a good cadence for me, at least. And like I said, the biggest question I'm asking myself is, how am I doing? And is it going the way I thought it would go? There's a great quote from Gandhi. I want to share this one quote real quick. This great quote from Gandhi that I came across when I was writing the Overworked book. It's his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, the sacred Hindu text. And the quote is, "In regard to every action, one must know the result that is expected to follow." And I really like that, because I think it sums up what that whole process is about, really. In regard to every action, one must know the result that is expected to follow. And so the result that is expected to follow are the outcomes, right? And in regard to every action, that's you at your best. And the routines are the bridge between the actions you take when you're at your best and the outcomes. The routines, kind of, I think, join the outcomes and the behaviors together. They align it, if you will. And the other thing that's really, I think, key about that quote is he doesn't say the outcomes that will follow. He says the outcomes that are expected to follow, because it's not like I'm getting so attached to a particular outcome that I feel like I've failed if it doesn't turn out exactly the way I envisioned, but I am moving in the direction of what I consider to be important, or what I consider to be beneficial to others or to myself or whatever it is, right? And so you give yourself some grace, with that kind of process, and you're open to course correction. You're open to other possibilities. Maybe the way it turns out is even better than you thought it would be. So it's a good thing you weren't attached the way it was, because you would have missed a better outcome even, right? So it's, it's all good.
Yeah. I loved the 3-4 day retreat, or a friend of mine called it advanced, that you do to really strategically plan your life. Like companies have strategic leadership sessions and you do it for your life and with your partner. I do it every early January. I take a white piece of paper and on top I say, at the end of the year, this year has been successful, rewarding, and satisfying because. And I list all the desired outcomes. It's like, to your point, what are the outcomes we aspire? So I do that. And I'm really good in establishing good routines, workout routines, eating routines, sleeping routines, relational routines, follow up with friends, work routines. So I'm really good at establishing those. The one thing I'm going to add is that first piece. When am I at my very best? How do I add more sequences, more units during out the day where I am on my best, and be leveraging that, because that's where we add most value, we are most connected, we are most productive. So I'm going to add this to my personal planning GPS.
Good. Awesome. Yeah, I think it
Thank you.
compounds, right? I mean, it routines compound. Whether they're good or bad, they compound. And I think it's the same thing with being thoughtful and mindful about the behaviors and characteristics that represent you at your best, right? I've found over the years that the more I think about them and the more I use them as a visualization tool or a reference point during visualization, I hope I'm showing up that way more, and I get feedback that I am, but it's incremental. It's not like, oh my gosh, I go to 100% perfect. I'm still not, probably never will be, but is it better than it was a few years ago? I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Quickly going back to your next level, you have those 3 areas. Your personal presence, your team presence, your organizational presence. I love the way you laid it out, and you have 3 areas for each of those where you need to stop doing things and add new things. Where do you see people leaders struggle the most? Which of those 3 levels, and where do you see some of the areas to get to that next level are most critical?
That's really good. The way I think about it these days, the edition that you were kind enough to show when we started is the 2nd edition. This orange one right here is the 3rd edition. And just after I sent in the manuscript for the 3rd edition to the publisher, like a month later, after it was already locked and loaded at the publisher and couldn't be changed, oh my gosh, this stuff is a pyramid. And what I mean by that is, like, personal presence is really a bunch of behaviors around how you manage yourself, right? And I think that's the foundation of the pyramid. Team presence is a lot of behaviors and mindsets around how you leverage your team and how you work through and with your team to get bigger things done. And then organizational presence is about how you engage your colleagues, and that's the top of the pyramid. And so to answer the question a little bit, where do they struggle? I think almost everybody I would say put it this way, 90 to 95% of the people that I've coached or that I meet through executive education programs struggle with uh, being in chronic fight or flight and pushing mindlessly as opposed to mindfully. And so I think that's the first thing, is to give yourself some routine. There's a metaphor that I learned from two really big mentors for me in graduate school, and I had the pleasure of speaking with one of them on Zoom yesterday. Marty Linsky is the one that I got to speak to yesterday, and that's amazing to me that I'm still connected with him 40 years later after grad school. He's an amazing person. Ron Heifetz was Marty's partner at Harvard in teaching, and they together came up with a school of leadership called adaptive leadership. And they've got a lot of really interesting, powerful, metaphorical phrases. And one of those is that as a leader, you can either be on the dance floor or you can be on the balcony. And it's important, that you alternate your perspective between the two. And I guess the reason I bring that up in terms of what people struggle with, and this is part of managing yourself, and it's part of being in chronic fight or flight and too much gas pedal, not enough brakes, is a lot of leaders, as they're coming up, they over index on the dance floor and they under index on the balcony, and they're just pushing and pushing and pushing as hard as they can, dancing as fast as they can without taking time to take a breath or 3 breaths and say, okay, what the hell's going on here? And is it working? And let me look at the bigger picture and all of that. So that's thing one. And that's related to challenge number 2, which is I was with a group of 60 or 70 leaders earlier this week. And the question I always like to ask a group of high potential leaders in a program like I was speaking to, raise your hand if you have ever thought of yourself or have been referred to as a go-to person. And in a room full of 70 people, every hand goes up, right? Because that's how they got to the high potential status. That's why they got promoted to be a director in their company or whatever it is, right? And so my joke is that's always and there's truth behind every joke. That's a great thing to be until it's no longer a great thing to be a go-to person. And everybody laughs. And I say, so when is it no longer a great thing to be? I said, well, because I can't do it all, or because I'm holding on to stuff that I shouldn't be holding on to, or I'm holding my team back or whatever. Exactly. And so that's hard to let go of that because it made you successful. And the picking up and letting go, if you ask again a room of 100 leaders, which is harder, picking up or letting go, and just tell them to shout it out, you're going to hear the entire room say at once, letting go. Exactly. Why is that? We talk about that. Well, picking up is a cognitive exercise. It's learning to do something new involving your brain. Letting go is an emotional exercise. And the underlying emotion that makes it hard for people to let go of being the go-to person in this example is fear. I am afraid. I'm afraid it's not going to go well. I'm afraid it's not going to turn out the way it would if I did it. I'm afraid if I don't do what I've been doing, my identity is going to be lost. I'm afraid, right? Exactly. And so we've got to get you past that and mitigate that and to help you identify the opportunity. And the opportunity is to make the shift from being the go-to person to the leader who builds and creates a team of go-to people. Now we have multiplied your impact. Now we've scaled your leadership. If you can make that shift, and it's the only way you even get the opportunity really to get to the top of the pyramid, which is to engage your colleagues. Because if you don't let go of being the go-to person, you're not going to have the bandwidth or really the perspective that you need to effectively engage your colleagues to work at the enterprise level to get the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of outcomes that only come from cross-functional diagonal collaboration, right? So that third one, the engaging your colleagues, I think once people get past the self-management challenges and the leveraging the team challenges, quite often the engaging your colleagues isn't as hard. There's some rules of the road and some unspoken, customs, that they have to learn. but I find that they learn those usually learn to master those relatively quicker and easier than they did the first two.
Yeah. This is a powerful concept. Very, very cool. As we kind of wrap up our discussions, what piece of advice do you have for this person who is in the midst of climbing the ladder, overwhelmed, stretched, but also pushing hard? What are things you recommend a person can start implementing next week?
Right now, you can implement breathe. If you're feeling like you're pushing too hard and you're overwhelmed, breathe, because it's the most immediate thing you can do to get yourself out of the state of fight or flight that you're in. The second thing to do after that is go for a walk. Like you said, Simon, it's like go for a walk. Get your autonomic nervous system reset. So you're in a place where you can think more clearly, look at the bigger picture, get up on the balcony, off the dance floor, and reset. Because almost everything else flows from that. You're gonna see the opportunities much more clearly. You're gonna make decisions about, the intention, what's the highest and best use of your time and attention if you are in a more relaxed, reflective kind of place than continuing to just put the gas pedal through the floor of the car, and that's honestly where I would start with almost anybody.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we started with, that leadership presence.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
To have that presence, it start being present, and breathing is a way to connect to the presence.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And it almost sounds too simple to be true, but I've you and I have both been coaching a long time, 25 years or whatever. I've seen it play out more times than I can count, at this point. If people can manage themselves more effectively, everything else gets easier, so that's where I'd start.
They show up more effectively.
Yeah. The kind of the summary of the idea I'm into these days is live better, lead better. When you live better, you lead better. And what I mean by live better is all the stuff we've talked about for the last hour. It's just the physical, mental, relational, spiritual, being clear about what peak performance looks like for you, having intention around the outcomes, not just at work, but in the rest of your life, about what makes life, frankly, worth living. And if you're in a leadership role, your impact is just going to be so much more positive and so much deeper, flowing from the choices you're making about the way you live.
Absolutely. Scott, this has been amazing, very insightful.
Great to talk
Thank you
with
for all your great insights and knowledge and tools and exercises. Where can we find you?
eblingroup.com. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there. Sign up for my newsletter, my website. Look at the videos, read the blog. I mean, there's lots of options. And just Google me, you'll find them.
Yeah, awesome. I have learned a lot from you.
Likewise,
over the years. You have been a great impact. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Be well. And to our next conversation.
We'll see you sometime in La Jolla.
Thank you for listening. I am Simon Vetter, and you have been listening to The Vision Architect. If this episode sparked new ideas, share it with someone you care. Until next time, keep imagining the future you want to create and start building it.